Mr. Watkins, I'm delighted and honored to have this time with you, and I appreciate you sitting down with me this morning to have this conversation.
Welcome.
Why don't we begin at the beginning? Can you tell us about your background and how you developed your sense of social and political awareness?
My parents were sharecroppers. I am the youngest of 12 children. I would say my beginning and the thing that started me off was the very few words that my father said to me. And those words were, "Son, you must always stand up for what is right, even if you are the only one standing." Looking at those words and trying to see them deeper in terms of human relations, I realized that in order for me to stand up for what was right, I had to stand up against all of that which was wrong. So I would say that was the very beginning. Those words, along with him saying to me and other brothers that you must always tell the truth. Irregardless, tell the truth. So, as far as I'm concerned, that was my beginning. And it was those words that shaped me and my early life and continued to impact my life ever since. Guidance through the civil rights movement, up until now. And still, to me, is good enough to continue to give me guidance as I go on in the future.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up in Mississippi and how growing up where you did influenced the way that you began to see the world?
I grew up in Lincoln County, out in the rural area. I went to school at Lincoln County Training School, Boga Chittor, Mississippi. So, had to ride the school bus to school because we lived out in the country and was about 12 miles from the school. So if you wasn't on time and missed your bus and didn't have someone or your own transportation, then that was a day that you missed. My father also taught me that everything that seemed to be right all the time was not right. So it needed to be considered, it needed to be analyzed, and then a decision, a conclusion reached after doing that. My father, being a sharecropper, bought his own land when I was about 8 years old. Bought our own land. He and my older brothers cut the trees off of the land, carried it to the sawmill, had it converted into lumber. They built our first house. Then, in addition to to building the house of my father and my older brothers. My father and them took the picks, shovels, axe, hoes, dug up the stumps to create a space for us to begin to do farming for ourselves rather than farming for someone else in the form of, as they call it, sharecropping. Mm-hmm. So my father was the kind of man that would say, if you can do it, there's no need to seek others to do it for you. If you can do it, then you do it. And that's the spirit and attitude that I've taken, that if I can do it, then I want to do it. If I can do it, I need to do it. So that's the spirit that I come from. That's the spirit that I bring and hold on to today.
When did you begin to hear about the Southern Freedom Movement? And was there a particular person or event that led you to make the choice to become involved?
There was this thing about the NAACP. People were afraid, or most people were afraid, to let other people know that they were members of the NAACP.
And would this be in the 1940s and 50s when you were coming up?
Yeah, this is when I was coming up. I was born in 1941. So the time we're talking about is 1959 is actually when I first got involved to any degree in terms of this movement. Mm-hmm. And it was with the NAACP. At that particular time, most people were afraid to let others know that they were members of the NAACP. So I bumped into or saw Medgar Evers, and he invited me to come to a meeting of the young people, which was really the youth chapter of the NAACP. And I went, and a few days or a short time after that, a friend girl of mine told me that Dr. Martin Luther King and some other big people were having meetings out in Macomb. She told me exactly where it was, and I went to see what was happening at these meetings. And when I got to the place where they were having the meetings, you know, I went in and I'm looking for Dr. King. Don't know him, don't have no idea what he looks like, but I fixated something in my mind as to what I thought he should look like. And when I opened the door and went in the building, I saw this little man, and I'm saying to myself, this can't be Dr. King, but maybe it is. And I asked him, I said, are you Dr. King? And he said, no, I'm Bob. So, okay. And I asked him what was he doing, you know, in Macomb. So he explained the whole process of trying to get people registered to vote and how, you know, he was not Dr. King, but he was doing some of the same thing, and invited me and my friends out in the country. There were 4 of us that kind of hung together and did things. So there were 4 of us. So the 4 of us met with Bob and decided that we would do what we could as a part of that process. After, I would say, after about a week and a half, another young man came into town. So he told us his name was Marion Barry. And he was the person that was a part of SNCC, responsible for direct action. So I asked him, what is direct action? He explained that whole process and asked if we would be willing to set up a chapter and do some of the things that young people were doing in other areas, which was having sit-in demonstrations, wade-in demonstrations, what have you. So I told him we would. So we created our own organization, Pike County Nonviolent Direct Action Committee. We investigated to see how many places and where those places were located that wouldn't let black folks have the same kinds of privileges as the white. And one of those places was the library, so we decided that we would have our first sit-in demonstration at the library. Didn't do our research too good because we all got ready to go to the library. However, when we met, the 22 that had said they would be ready to go was not 22 of us anymore. It had been reduced to 2. And that was myself and Curtis, and we decided that we was, as one of the songs say, ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. And the 2 of us proceeded to the library. Had not done the research too good because the library was closed. Some people thought it was closed because they got the word that we were coming to have a demonstration, but that was not the case. It was closed because that was the day of the week that the library was closed. So we were determined not to allow anyone to turn us around. And we went back down the streets looking for another place, which we found very easily because we had some idea where it was, and that was the Woolworth lunch counter. And we decided that we would go there and try to get a cup of coffee. And that's where we were not served. That's where the police was already in the store and arrested us, carried us to jail. My first time going to jail, which was that time, I spent 34 days in jail.
How old were you at the time that you were first jailed?
The time I was first jailed was, 40, let's see, 41 to, I was 19.
So 1960, 61, somewhere around
It
there?
was 1961.
Okay. And getting involved with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was that more appealing than getting involved with any of the other groups? What was it about SNCC that was appealing to a young person like yourself?
Activities. Young people like to be involved in active things. And to me, that's what, SNCC was doing. They were active, getting young people involved. with aid and assistance coming from the older people. But you could clearly see where there was a direct role for young people to play, and they could help determine which of these roles they wanted to head down and play for themselves.
And so was part of the appeal was that young people were in charge of young people rather than having older people be in charge of young people and then telling them what they should do?
Well, for the most part, this was about young people being in charge of programs themselves. You know, they had no problem with older people being involved as a part of the process. But the most important thing, as we saw it, was that this is something that young people have decided that they were going to do, and we don't have older people standing and saying, wait, you should wait a while, you can't do that right now for this and for that reason. So we saw this program as a program that gave a certain degree of freedom to young people to speak how they saw things, then to do what they felt was necessary to help correct the situation.
And would you consider the initial involvement that you and Curtis Hayes and others had in Macomb to be maybe in some way the beginning of the student movement in Mississippi?
I guess I would. You know, there were things that young people were doing, but as a full-fledged movement, I would say that was the beginning, you know, the student movement, you know, in Mississippi.
Is there anyone other than Curtis that you can remember being part of the energy of that movement? I don't like to use the word leader because I know leader was everyone was considered a leader in some ways, but who were some of the others that were involved in Macomb when you first got involved?
There were 22 of us. You know, that was the 22 that was supposed to be going, but the parents stopped, you know, 20 of the 22. You know, I often wonder if I had told my parents the truth and the details of what I really was asking them, I probably would not have been able to go for that sit-in demonstration, because I told my parents, see, and I had just finished high school, so I told my parents I wouldn't be back. I was going to spend the night out in Macomb with some of my friends, which is, you take the S off of friend, then it hits it right on the head, because it was only Curtis and I had full intentions for it to be a number of us, and I was going to spend the night with them in jail. That was, but see, I didn't explain all of that. But as it turned out, it was all right with my parents that I did what I did. So it grew, so there were people right now, for example, there's a young man who is on the city council in Summit that was one of the students that walked out of the Berkeley High School. I'm not sure who all is still around. Brenda Travis is still alive, still here.
Okay. going to Hattiesburg and getting involved with that work there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the way I got involved in going to Hattiesburg is Vernon Dahmer heard about all of this stuff that C.C. Bryant and his folks had going on over in Pike County area. So he came over and talked with C.C. Bryant, and they talked about some of those young people coming to Hattiesburg and working with him. So Curtis and I were chosen to go to Hattiesburg and work with Vernon Dahmer. So that's how we got there. He came over to Macomb and talked with C.C. Bryant and let him know that he liked the good stuff that he was doing and wanted to know how he could get some of the young people to work with him to do some similar things. So I was one of the two that was sent to Hattiesburg, and that's when I met Mr. Dahmer, who was the number one person that I would be working with. And as it turned out, I lived, while over there, I lived, with Mr. Dahmer, and he was very, very instrumental because we didn't have a vehicle. So he provided us with a vehicle, to go and do the things that needed to be done pertaining to redistricting and voting. So that was real good, and if we had a break in the time when we were supposed to be doing something, then we worked and aided Mr. Dahmer in terms of his farm, his farming. He had large acres of land, large in reference to the size of plots that black people had. So, because he had lots of cattle, most every year he produced somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 bales of cotton. So he was a good farmer, a good civil rights worker, and just a good man.
Many people outside Mississippi, especially younger people that will be watching this, don't know much about Vernon Dahmer. What made him so special and so important for so many of the younger people who were involved in the movement during that time?
The thing that made him special was he was willing to take a risk on his life. He was willing to let young people lead their own movement and had no problem with that. He would serve as an advisor and saw some things that young people did not or perhaps did not know. He would call them and he would talk to them about it and explain to them why he was saying, what he was saying. So just like now, people who want to be a part of something, if they see those who has a status above them but is not willing to close the gap, but let them have the rights which they sure already deserve to move forward. They make the final decisions, and he served as an advisor, an aider, and a helper. So when people saw, or young people saw, Mr. Dahmer operating from that perspective, naturally fell in love with him. They wanted to be a part of the work that he was doing. And he had so many people from the community that loved him, believed in him, that would speak on his behalf.
And when the decision was made to begin voter registration work in Hattiesburg, can you talk a little bit about the obstacles that were in your way?
The obstacle that was in our way in Hattiesburg was the same obstacle that was in our way all across, which was the obstacle of fear. Many times people attempted to go register. As a result for attempting to go register, the house may be firebombed. They may be even shot, wounded, or in some cases possibly killed. So that was the biggest obstacle. What is it that I have to lose? So am I willing to run the risk of having this happen to me? Or whether, as some folks would say, come hell or high waters, I'm going to go ahead and do this because I know it needs to be done. And if we don't do it, then who's going to do it? If we don't do it, 15, 20 years from now, we'll still have that same problem. So that was the biggest problem, was fear that the Klan and other white organizations and or individuals instill in the mind of people who were either involved or considering being involved. So instill fear in them to prevent them from doing what they had a right, to have and to do. Theron. Don't give him all of that Theron. Theron Lynn.
Okay.
Theron Lynn.
Yeah. I'll let you take it from here.
Okay.
We won't dignify him.
All right. Theron was the circuit clerk over in Forest County. And they are the ones that determine when you go in and attempt to register whether you pass the test. And at that time, the very vast majority of black people that went to take the test flunked the test. And as a result of that, they could not become a registered voter. And the white people, if they got the word about black people, any black person, etc., coming, trying to register, they would start some intimidation, of those people. There was a process by where if you attempted to register before you got the word as to whether you passed or not, your name had to be published in the paper for a certain period of time. And we felt that this was to let the white people know which black people were attempting to register, as they say, which one was stirring up trouble. And therefore they could do whatever they needed to do or wanted to do or felt like they should do to intimidate them because they had the right to withdraw their name if they wanted to. So a number of people withdrew the names. But a lot of them decided that what they wanted to do or was attempting to do was fair, right, and just, and they were going to let it be. So that was one of the bigger obstacles, was trying to fight back and stand up, against the Ku Klux Klan.
How did you and a couple of others get involved with the CBS reports on Theron Lind to expose some of the stuff that he was doing? How did that all come about?
I'm not sure how that originated, because I was told that they were coming and wanted to make a movie, and I didn't see anything wrong with it, so my feeling was that however I can aid and assist and participate, then I'm willing to do that. So that's how, I saw it. That's how I initially got involved. And things were basically done through Mr. Dahmer and his local chapter, the NAACP. SNCC, Bob, and some of the other folks that was a part of SNCC, they were working, doing some things with him. But here again, SNCC's attitude and feeling was that it would not come into an area and take the credit of what's taking place away from local community people, for our organization. We were always there to aid and assist, help the local organizations become strong, do what needed to be done, and eventually get to the point where we wouldn't, as our organization, SNCC, we wouldn't necessarily be needed at all because the local would be able to take charge and do what needed to be done. So that's how, we looked at it and how we dealt with it.
What was that experience like? You went in to register to vote, or you went in to see Theron Lind, and you were wearing a microphone? An undercover microphone of some sort?
Yeah, I had an undercover mic, and this was one of those situations where we wanted to get Theron Lind, on tape. So they wired me up, and in addition to having Theron Lind's words and him talking, they wanted to have photographs of his office and him and some of the cohorts that was working with him. So I agreed to be wired up, and they were a couple blocks down the street recording everything that went on. So they told me, now when you go in, this camera that you got, it was like a briefcase. So when you go in, you speak and you flash, not, in a way that people would know you're doing something different, but we practiced on that a little bit, and I had it down pat. So when the day came, they wired me up and I went in. And in the conversation with Theron Lind about voter registration and turning people down as a part of that, he changed the subject. and asked me, did I know what a Cowser blade or a bush axe was? Had I ever used one? Did I know what a hoe was? He started asking me, and instinctively, when he started asking me those, my instincts say, it's time that you begin to go towards the door to get ready to get up out of here, because it seemed as if he wanted to know whether I could use them as a signal to let me know that these are the things that you will be using in just a little bit when we put you in jail and have you to start working out on the road games. So that was kind of interesting, but overall, it turned out to be all right.
Okay. What role did music play in the movement?
Music played a big role in the movement. Singing was a part of my culture, still is. When you go to most black community, if not right there in that community, in close proximity of that community, you will find churches. Most of those churches, they start their programs of their service, they start them off with singing. Because singing is an instrument or a tool that being used to bring people together, to help people forget about some of the problems that they are facing. It helps in creating a bond, a good relationship. That's what it does in the community every day. So we wanted to make sure we didn't kick that part out, which was one of the most powerful parts. And that's also why we decided that we have to keep that tradition of singing in the movement and just change some words of some songs to make them more appropriate for movement, than the regular church singing. So that's how we looked at it. And some of the same verses that were used in some of the church songs, we used those as a part of bringing us together, as a part of the civil rights movement and bonding people through the singing of the songs. And the songs help people to forget some of the hardships, some of the problems that they're faced with, that allows them to be able to go on just a little bit further.
What were some of the more popular songs that became movement songs? Some of the songs that came out of the church that ended up becoming movement songs or freedom songs. Were there any songs in particular that were more meaningful to you than some others, or were they all equally meaningful?
No, they weren't all equal. For example, This Little Light of Mine, was one of the more popular ones. And one of the ones that we use, which helped us to overcome fear, was Ain't Scared of Nobody 'Cause I Want My Freedom. That became very popular. Another one that we sang was Get On Board, Little Children. Let's fight for human rights. And the one, for example, with Ain't Scared of Nobody. See, that was one of the things that, you know, the white people at that time were attempting to do and instill fear, you know, but we knew that if you wasn't afraid, you wouldn't let nobody turn you around. you keep on doing what needed to be done, and that's how we dealt with it, you know. And verses were added because when they would change their tactics and the way they would come out, you know, you ain't scared of nobody. Sometimes they go and they get a dog or two. Most young folks, you know, was afraid of dogs. So that was another verse that we added, you know, to the song was, ain't scared of no dog, 'cause I want my freedom. And then there was another verse where we'd say, because they talk about putting us all in jail. So we added a verse for the jail and said, ain't scared to go to jail because I want my freedom. So we did those to try to take away, you know, the tools he had, but they become a tool for us, you know, to use to give us strength. And see, this whole thing about jail, it was very crucial. Because a lot of people didn't realize, but there were so many black men, and especially young black men, that had been killed in the jail. And the way they were killed is that they were sold on to being afraid and getting out of there. They tried to pull that trick on me once. You know, the jailer told me, so okay, Hollis says, we're gonna let you go. Say you ain't give us no trouble, so we gonna let you go. So I asked him, I said, well, who put up my bond money? He said, nobody. You just been a good nigga, so haven't caused us a lot of trouble, so we gonna let you go. I said, I know I haven't served my time, and if no one put my bond money up, I don't have a right to leave. So I'm going back into the jail. And he stopped me and said, wait a minute. He said, don't make another step. You do, I'll blow your brains out. And he said, you better be glad you didn't walk down the steps, because if you had, I was gonna whistle. And them boys was gonna come from around the side of the building with them bloodhound dogs, and them bloodhound dogs was gonna have dinner in your backside. So I just simply kept on walking and said, I'm not afraid of dogs. My dad had taught me how to kill dogs. Now, the trick that led to so many deaths around that was that young men mostly would be excited about trying to get out. And when they're told, we're gonna let you go, they say, okay, you know, and they start walking off. And once they get down the steps and out onto the lawn of the jail, they shoot them in the back and kill them. Publicize that they were trying to escape, and when they yelled to them and said stop, they didn't stop, they kept on running. So we ended up having to shoot them to stop them. That was the end piece about not being afraid of the jail because of what that jailhouse represented. Death to so many black young men.
There's a somewhat famous picture of you standing out in a field with Bob Moses, Amzie Moore, Julian Bond and E.W. Steptoe. What's the story behind that picture?
The story behind that picture has to do with, and I don't remember the name of it, but there was a large event that was taking place down in a mid-county. And it was taking place on E.W. Steptoe's farm. So the weather was very cold for Mississippi.
They're all wearing coats and hats.
So the weather was very cold. And we had on some of our medium-sized coats. And we decided that we wanted to just take a little stroll, you know, in the edge of the farm, and having E.W. to give us a little bit of the history of his farm and that process. And as we went through that process, we got off into the farming aspect of being out in the rural and how that took place. And where we are right now, it's in the morning. We had spent the night with E.W. Steptoe, and it was cold, you know, because his heating in his house, as most of us would say, was not proper for real cold weather. However, we were determined that we would be all right, and we made it to be all right. So that's where we're doing a kind of overview with one another about some of the things that we had been working on, some of the problems that we felt that we had and needed to overcome, and also discussing things that we could do in the future to make things a little bit better and more progress come about. So that's kind of where we were, and to keep from having, you know, everybody to be involved in that discussion. We got up early, and then we ventured out in the field. Just by virtue of those two things, a lot of people wouldn't be interested in being a part of the sideline discussion, because, you know, they want to get as far as they can away from the field, because they had bad experience there, and definitely did not exactly like the real cold weather.
Bob's in Mississippi at this time. You're all from Mississippi except Julian. Do you remember why he was there?
Julian was kind of like the secretary / reporter for SNCC. So this, as I mentioned, there's a kind of big event that's taking place down on E.W. Steptoe's farm. So Julian has come over, which he did periodically come through bringing news, sometimes good news, sometimes not so good news, but bringing news about what is happening in other areas, what people are doing. In many instances, Julian served as the newspaper, served as the radio announcer, in bringing news about what's happening over in Alabama, what's happening over in Georgia, to us in Mississippi. Now, when he goes back, he works his way back through, he delivers a message to those on his way back of what's happening in Mississippi.
Was that the first time you met Julian Bond, or had you met him before?
I had met him before. That was the first time that, we had been together for that period of time, and spending the night at someone's house and all. So it was the first time, thing for me, but it worked out to be real good. One of the things that I learned was to what extent, to a greater extent, the role that the farmers was playing in the civil rights movement.
You learned about that through Julian, or you learned about that through this meeting, or?
I learned about that through the event and our little dialogue out in the field.
Okay. What was your impression of Julian Bond when you met him during that period?
Well, I had a very good and positive, feeling about him. Mainly, I think because, he was a young man, and that was always good, as I saw it, to have young people. And he seemed to have been interested in the role that he was playing, and that what he was doing was so very important, which is kind of like someone gather up all the information about this, about that's going on here. I don't have no idea that that's even going on. And just to have the attitude, the spirit, and the willingness to do that kind of thing meant a whole lot to me. And I felt, hey, this is a good brother. He's doing a very, very important thing, playing a major, major role in our movement, because we know that from time to time, based on what happens in one area, impacts what is happening in the next area. So he, even though a lot of people might not see it, but being, as some folks might say, being the message boy, he's doing a lot of good in keeping us informed, because in many cases, our degree in whether we're informed or not determines life and death.
So he was an important person to relay information within SNCC, among people within the Southern movement, as well as represent the movement to the outside world.
Yes, very much so.
Did you, when you met him, did you ever anticipate that he would become famous, that he would one day run for office in the state of Georgia, and then everything that would happen with that, and his case would go to the Supreme Court, and then by 1968, he's a very well-known national person. He's nominated for vice president at the Democratic Convention, even though everyone knows he's too young to do it. When you first met him, did you ever see that happening? Or was this a surprise to you to watch his career through the 60s take the route that it did?
I looked at that from the perspective of we are fighting and working to create possibilities. And I realized that any and all of these possibilities was standing there, waiting there for us to take them on. And at any point in time, you know, based on his willingness, based on his ability to report, express, you know, different situations, circumstances, I knew that he could become any and all of that. You know, I knew, for example, right after I met Marion Barry, that he could become. You know, I knew if Bob had wanted to, he could become. It just depends on what the person was willing. But knowing that they had the capability, you know, to do. And one of the ways that I would judge progress in the broader society was how many of us would be elevated or elevate ourselves to these and coming at different times. So I knew it could happen, you know, and I wasn't surprised, you know, when it did, you know, come about.
Well, by his own admission, Julian Bond was not a very good singer, but you managed to stay friends with him anyway. Is that right?
Yeah, of course. Well, one of the things, a lot of the workers who was afraid of singing wanted to be seen as someone who cannot sing. But what they were really afraid of being put on the spot and forced to be one of those who led the songs. Because, see, if you had the opportunity to stand close by them in a meeting or out in the field, you know, with where folks are gathered or something, if you had the opportunity to be close, right next to that person who can't sing, you say, well, boy, he's getting down today. You know, you can see where, and that's the piece that most people, you know, who feel that they can't do this in terms of singing, they are basing their ability to sing against someone else's ability, but it becomes a thing kind of like, I can't sing lead songs like Fannie Lou Hamer. I can't lead songs like so-and-so and so. And they're trying to be protective of themselves, of being put on the spot and say, so-and-so wants you to come out and lead us on a few. You know, I'm a singer, I sing with people, but I haven't reached the point where, you know, I can do a successful job in leading. And that's where a lot of our folks are.
How would you describe Julian Bond's legacy during those years of the Southern Freedom Movement?
To me, Julian really was an information man. You know, he was an information person. He, as far as how I looked at him, I saw him being one who knew how to get in-depth information, and most of the time, who to get it from, and then could display it, project it to those that needed it and to those who, once getting it, would use it as a tool that they're using in their repertoire. So, and there were times when, to me, he would display that. He would give up good information, talk about it, and if he knew someone who, for example, was a halfway decent, singer and could lead a few songs, he would request that person to come and do. And I think he knew and understood that this what I have will go along easier and better if it has someone to stir the pot, as we say, and bring forth a higher spirit. See, so that's how I see him. And I saw him as a person that was not selfish. He would go with you. He would help or share in that which needed to be shared. So I think, and I think he understood and caused a lot of others to understand that information is so important, and it needs to be shared among all of us to the fullest extent as possible. All of us that's a part of this movement, so that we all can grow in a way that we need to grow and will grow if we have good, positive, correct information. I think he saw having the good reports and dealing with those as, they say, the man that's hunting realize that he's got a couple extra shells in his bag. So therefore, since he's got that, I got something to do what need to be done. I can walk a little bit further. I can talk a little bit more. And that's kind of how he went down. So that's how I see him,
Do you have any other final thoughts about Julian Bond's legacy from that time?
Yeah, one of the things that I'd say is that Julian didn't have no problem in letting people know and understand where he stood. And to me, that's very important, because if you are part of a group, then everybody in the group should know exactly where everybody is and where you're coming from and what your ideals and thoughts are. And Julian didn't mind presenting his, displaying his, and if necessary, do a little nudging and putting a little pressure on you to do as, not as I say, but as I have done.
I know you mentioned in your book, and if you'd like to hold up your book for the camera so that people can see it and maybe order it. There it is. It's Mr. Watkins' book. You want to tell us about that title before I ask you my question?
No. The title is Brother Hollis, the Sankofa of a Movement Man. I took that title because I decided that it was time for me to do a book because there was so many great people, and especially women, that was involved in the civil rights movement that had not been mentioned in books. So I decided it was time that I come forward, starting with my early life as the youngest of 12 children who were born to sharecroppers, and bring some of that above ground so people would know that it was more than just a handful of this. So, there I am.
There you are. Now, for people who don't know what the word Sankofa means, what does it mean?
That's the term that we got out of Africa. And it's generally identified as being a bird. And being a bird flies, travel over large periods of areas. And that's what I have been doing. That's what I'll continue to do, for the most part. And it, as I said, came out of Africa. And here again, when you relate that to where we are now, it's important for you to look back and see where you came from. Knowing where you came from helps you to be able to determine the obstacles, the things that you might have to go through, and how much time to get to where it is that you want to go. And that Sankofa bird does that. We got a bird in here. See, there's the bird right there. That's the bird, Sankofa bird. And as you see, anytime you see a statue or a photograph of a Sankofa bird, they usually will be looking back so that they can have a true assessment of where they came from and what's going to be needed and necessary for them to get to where they're trying or need to go. I say trying or need to go because we do make mistakes sometimes. Sometimes we be trying to get to where we don't need to go. So I just wanted to put that there in those times. So I just want to say, for those of you that would like to get a copy of my book, you can get it directly from me, with me having autographed it. And the address would be Post Office Box 1056, Clinton, Clinton, Mississippi, 39060. Or you can give me a call at 601-278-2142. That's how you can get the book. It only costs $30. It only costs $30. So, I want to encourage all of the young people out there to dig a little bit deeper in knowing the history that your uncles and grandparents and all of them have had to deal with, and decide which direction you're going to take. And I pray that it be to help still resolve some of the problems and conflicts that we have in this country today. So just want to ask you to do that and join me in singing a verse or two of one song, or maybe a verse of two different songs.
You gonna sing for us now?
I'm going to do it right now.
Okay.
There's a song that I wrote in honor of Nelson Mandela. Go like this. Oh, Mandela, Mandela, oh, Mandela, Mandela, oh, Mandela, Mandela. We're gonna set Mandela free. Mandela, he crossed the land, shouting, people, take a stand. Oh, Mandela, Mandela, oh, Mandela, Mandela, oh, Mandela, Mandela. We're gonna set Mandela free. Cape Town, Soweto, freedom come, then apartheid go. Oh, Mandela, Mandela, oh, Mandela, Mandela, oh, Mandela, Mandela. We're gonna set Mandela free. The rich says yes, the poor says no. We wonder, where did Botha go? Oh, Mandela, Mandela, oh, Mandela, Mandela, oh, Mandela, Mandela. We're gonna set Mandela free. So, that gives you a little bit, a taste of what we do, how we do it, and we look to hear from you.
Thank you.